to this meeting of Cabinet on the 12th of January 2024. I'll take apologies for absence first, please.
I've received no apologies.
Okay, thank you. Move on then to disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Are there any to declare?
Apologies from Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Okay, thank you. We'll note those. We know he has an appointment this morning. Okay, disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest for the items today. No, none. Okay, apologies. Move on then to announcements of the Leader of Council. I have no formal announcements this morning, so we'll move on to public question time. I do not see any members of the public present today, so we'll move on to councillor question time. Again, I do not see any councillors present who are not members of the Cabinet today. So therefore, we'll move on to the budget proposals for 24, 25 to 27, 28. And I will bring Mr. Smith in first to provide his technical advice on this item.
Thank you, Leader. I'll be very, very brief in terms of technical advice. You'll be aware it is a late settlement, as you've had for a number of years, and I have therefore certified the report as urgent. I think it is also worth noting that pretty much every council in Wales has done the same thing. I think there's been a flurry of cabinets called for last week and this week, where they are all considering their initial proposals. In terms of technical advice, first of all, there were no surprises in one sense in the settlement in terms of some of the internal assumptions and modelling we've been doing for several months. That does make the process easier for putting a set of proposals in front of you, but it is obviously still the case, and I'm sure you will want to comment in due course, that there is a lack of funding in the system across the public sector and councils across the piece, which is driving some concerns and probably bigger concerns in other places at the moment in terms of the scale of pressures that are faced. I would want to draw your attention to late breaking news last night from Welsh Government officials that there are some minor errors in the settlement. I won't revel in the schadenfreude of it, because when people do stuff at pace, it can result in difficulties. The upshot is there was £158 of additional revenue, and I did mean pounds, and given we budget to the nearest thousand, I don't think you need to make any decision changes today. Slightly better news on the capital. You and I have both referenced a £30,000 uplift to capital. It does look like it's going to be revised to a £61,000 uplift in capital. Someone would say every little helps. Other supermarkets are available, but the reality is at least we haven't lost anything, and I'm not proposing that you need to change the recommendations in front of you simply because capital is done slightly later in the process. The settlement itself is materially different from previous years, but in line with Welsh Government pre-announced intentions before the autumn budget statement and decisions that they have taken around prioritising services. I think it important I draw your attention to section 4.3, which does emphasise that a lot of the media reporting and focus rightly will be on service reductions and the cut side of the equation, but there is still over £80 million in net cash going into services over the 4 years. Which is a matter that you are normally keen, as am I, to make clear. Table 1 is important because it's where I do some of my technical bits of trickery, which I feel are reasonable to do to try and maximise the wiggle room you have for a set of budget proposals, which undoubtedly maximise the amount that you can put into schools, place-based services, and crucially social services. I have given advice that you may safely reduce the central inflation provision, defer some of the capital charges, but in line with your deferred borrowing strategy for new capital borrowing. Yes, relying on some temporary use of underspending on capital charges in year. You'll be aware that in recent years we set a budget and then have materially underspent on capital financing because of the financial strategy we've undertaken. I think it is reasonable for us to bake a bit of that in temporarily in terms of setting the budget. There is some early draw from capital equalisation reserve, perfectly modest and reasonable, with a large amount deferred to the end period because that's consistent again with the deferral of the capital strategy and may not need to be used. It will depend on the trajectory for interest rates, etc., over the next couple of years. It also proposes £7 million worth of additional draw from reserves, particularly in terms of the schools offer. Several of us have met with the unions this week, and also Councillor Robert Smith and myself and officers with the school budget forum, and we have made very clear that many of the proposals are one-off in terms of assistance to schools to try and maximise and turbocharge the amount of support you're able to give to frontline services. I think when you take a step back and consider where other authorities are positioning themselves in Wales in terms of scale of likely council tax increases and the pressures and options they're facing, and even more so in England. I think you've got a set of proposals that are perfectly reasonable to me. I'm sure they're not entirely politically joyous for yourselves in terms of still having to recommend a net £25 million worth of savings proposals, but you can only work with what financial parameters you and the Welsh Government have given to you. Many councils do also give a firm indication on the level of council tax. You have decided to not set that out in the report at this stage, but to just to advise it's consistent with the central planning assumptions. Our medium-term financial plan is based on a central assumption of around the 5% mark and a range of 3 to 7. I think it is right that you leave your options open at the moment, because whilst this is around the draft settlement for core financing, one of the things that will cause concern to a number of parties is what happens with specific grants, because a number of the specific grants at a national level are clearly flat and in some cases are likely to be reduced. But until we know the specific terms and conditions and what we get in Swansea, I think there are some things you will want to take into account. The rest of the report sets out all of the specific assumptions I've made, which I think are reasonable in the circumstances and are designed to maximise the amount you can put into frontline services. My advice doesn't change from that which I gave to council before the settlement, which is, I believe that what could be reasonably evidenced by every service, for every £10 that services would like, we can probably only agree to put £1 in at the moment in terms of planning assumptions, and that's why there is as much in terms of savings ask as there is net going in. I think it's also the case that you are well versed and used to having a savings ask, regrettably, of about £20 million a year. It's a bit heavier in year one, but over the lifetime of the MTFP, this is relatively normal business in terms of the proposals you're setting out to consider and start to consult on, albeit it is clearly real terms pressures on all public services. And I think you've absolutely minimised the impact all the way through. And that includes drawing attention to the staffing proposals. Again, I'm sure you would prefer to have no staffing proposals in there at all at risk, but they are relatively modest, difficult still for you to consider, but relatively modest given, as I say, the relative lack of core spending power, because inflation may have come down, but as you're aware, it doesn't remove all of those costs that were baked in the past, the trebling of energy costs, a number of pay arrangements that are negotiated at national level, not at local level, and that's your biggest that's your biggest spend bill. So I don't think I need to give any more technical advice. The report sets out clearly the timeline and the assumptions I've made, and I think it is as reasonable as can be done in the circumstances, and that's why, as I think there may be more interest elsewhere in other authorities about the range and nature of some of the savings proposals that they are having to be considering putting up, and also the levels of council tax that they are thinking that they may have to consider putting up. That's the only technical advice I need to give to you, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll move now then to introduce the report formally and to move the report formally. As you've alluded to, the situation remains dire for local government, and there is a reason and a rationale for that, and that goes back to the autumn statement made by the UK government in London before Christmas, where a total sum of 305 million was provided to the Welsh Government to fund all of its services in Wales, including health, local government and everything else the Welsh Government are responsible for. To put that into context, that is over a 2-year period, meaning around 165 million is available to the Welsh Government over each year. Now, again, to put that into perspective, we spend close to £200 million on education in Swansea alone. So to expect a government to fund all of its pressures and all of its services effectively on such a small sum of money is completely ridiculous. It is a deliberate act by the UK government, and it has placed not just the Welsh Government, but devolved nations in a very difficult position. Obviously, we know that a further budget is coming in March this year, and we are hopeful that given that we're in an election year, that even the UK Tory government may see its way to providing some extra money for services. Now, if that does happen, that is likely to be after we set our budget here in Swansea and when most of Wales will have set its budgets. But again, we will continue to lobby UK government and Welsh government to ensure any monies made available are tracked through and are passed on to the relevant service areas for funding. So again, but we can only plan, as Mr. Smith has said, on the numbers that we know, and what we know at the moment is that it's a terrible situation. If you look across Wales at the moment, you will see councils proposing to close their library services, turn off street lighting, go to 3 or 4 weekly black bag collections, to reduce a range of support services for people in social care, to remove or reduce services to those struggling with special needs. We are not proposing to do any of those things in Swansea. And we're able to do that not only because we have built up a significant amount of reserves that we will be intending to deploy this year to support our services through what will be a very difficult year, but also to ensure that the decisions we took on borrowing a few years ago allow us to use some of the additional revenue from that borrowing in order to support services temporarily. It is a very temporary situation, but as I've said elsewhere, if this is a rainy day provision, then it's monsoon season, and that means that we do have to act. And as a council that listens and as a council that cares about its services, then it's right that we utilise those levers this year to offset some of the pressures that we otherwise would face. What does that mean in terms of actual pressures? Well, instead of having a £25 million gap to fill, we've got a £12 million gap to fill, and that's where the proposals, many of which are linked to things which don't affect people's jobs directly, in Appendix B, amount to that £12 million of savings. In terms of our schools, Councillor Smith and I already met with head teachers prior to Christmas. Were schools to receive a fair share of the funding that the council has received, and the council received about £15.5 million extra this year as part of its share of the Welsh Government settlement, then schools would have had around £4.5 million. Through discussions with Mr. Smith and his officers, and through prudent use of established reserves, and the fact that we're able to eke out a little bit more resources for schools, you will see in the papers on table 7, we're proposing to provide schools with some £17 million this year, as opposed to the £4.3 million that they would otherwise have got. I think any other council in Wales is going to struggle to match that offer to their schools this year in terms of what we're able to do. And that is through the use of a specific reserve. And that is a mantra you'll hear me say more and more as we get towards full council. Again, I've had some discussions with Mr. Smith and his team at the moment about some specific and some sensible use of one-off reserves to support services across the council this year. Obviously, our budget at the moment balances on the assumptions that Mr. Smith covered. But again, if you look at council tax across Wales at the moment, councils in Wales are consulting on council tax of up to 10% at the moment. Again, through the prudent use of our resources and through prudent planning and making sure that our services are delivered in the most cost-effective way, we are again not looking at that sort of level of council tax increase. But it is for each council to make its determination, and councils will be in really difficult situations across Wales, and I really do feel for what they've been handed as part of the UK government's settlement. Turning to staff, which Mr. Smith also alluded to, again, over many years we've worked carefully with our union colleagues to ensure that wherever we can, we ensure that we avoid compulsory redundancies. Now, you will see a small number of posts affected in the papers today, less than 30. Of those, some are already vacant posts that we have carried into this budget cycle. And again, we would seek to deal with the vacant posts ahead of posts that have staff in them. But even where there are staff in them, we are confident that through the use of redeployment, early voluntary severance and other mechanisms, that we can avoid compulsory redundancies. But of course, I can't give a cast iron guarantee on that, because it may be that a member of staff does not want to take any of those options. So again, can't give a 100% guarantee, but we have been successful in previous years, as members will know, in avoiding compulsory redundancies. And I see no reason why we can't get to that position this year again. Again, just finally then, in terms of the investment, as Mr. Smith has said, investment of up to 80 million potentially over the next few years. significant investment across a number of services, which I will obviously say more about as we come to agree the final budget in March. But again, given the environment that we're in, given what the rest of Wales and the rest of the UK are going through, again, these proposals, I think, are probably some of the most benign in Wales and ones that demonstrate our commitment to delivering high quality services, supporting our staff and supporting the services that people rely on in Swansea every day. So with that, I remove the report. Could I ask for a seconder, please?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. I'd like to second the report. It don't give me no pleasure, no, but I think what it does do, you know, if I could just take us through the process, we've got to this stage. It's been long, it's been hard. I think each cabinet member, when we have sat in the Star Chamber, has probably had you know, really ironed out, looked at what we can do, what we can't do. And this is the best that we could come up with, to be honest with you. So none of it is easy, but what we've done, we've scrutinized each other, we've looked at it, we give support to each other, and we are where we are. And I would like to thank the leader for his leadership, for Ben Smith for his certainly for the information he's given us, and the whole CMT for the honesty that they brought to the process. Each and every one of us have come into this authority to make a difference, to deliver. We don't want to make cuts. So what I would say, we've done it with due diligence, we've looked at it, and we've tried to minimise. We've worked with the trade unions, and the trade unions have constantly been alongside us throughout this process. So I would like to thank the CMT, trade union, and the fellow cabinet members for the support right throughout the process. And I so move the report. Second the report, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hoppers. It's remiss of me not to thank everyone, but we usually do that at Council. But thank you for placing that on record today. I do appreciate it. With that, then the report has been moved and seconded. Are there any cabinet members who wish to comment? Councillor Stevens.
I just wanted to come in, quick chair. I should have come in at the beginning. I just wanted to highlight a personal interest for the market reference in the appendix of the report. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we'll note that.
And I echo with both your comments as well.
No problem. Are there any other comments from any cabinet members? Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I think echo what you and the Deputy Leader have said in relation to the budget this year as it relates to the education budget. If you look at the education budget on its own, then it is what it is. But I think when you look at it in terms of the council budget as a whole, then I think that does reinforce the message that we have prioritised those schools. We're trying to prioritise frontline services. And I think that's the message that's coming through here. Is it what I want? No, of course it's not. But I think in the reality of what's facing us at the moment, this is a settlement for our schools and a settlement for the Education Directorate as a whole. That is as best, probably one of the best that can be expected in the whole of Wales at the moment.
Absolutely. Okay, anybody for anything else? If not, then we'll go to the vote, seeing as we're mostly present. If we go for physical hands on this one. So all those in favour of the report, please show. Okay, thank you. That is unanimous. And that concludes our agenda for today. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and I'll declare the meeting closed.